As some of you might possibly be aware, I have a qualification in aerospace engineering, otherwise known as rocket science. A number of aspects of that qualification involve aircraft, avionics, simulations and related systems, so I tend to be pretty nifty around flight sims. After all, 14 years of flight sim experience is not too bad. Welcome to Total Reviews, the web show where we take a look at games of interest and see if they really are worth a purchase, in partnership with Games Planet, where you can purchase games like our choice today at a discounted rate from an officially licensed game seller. Today I take a look at Dovetail Games Flight School, the newest flight simulator on the market. Released in 2016 May on PC, at the time of this review it is on update 4. System specs are quite reasonable, with only a dual-core at 2.5 GHz, 4GB of RAM and a 512MB DX11 GPU needed to run the sim, plus 25GB of hard drive space. In many ways this is very similar to the original specs recommended by Microsoft's Flight Simulator 10. Now my first question about this title was, why? With the likes of X-Plane and P3D and the continued popularity of FSX, I wondered why anybody would want to create another flight simulator and try and compete with those big guns. Reading the game information, it read, "Unleash the pilot within with Dovetail Games Flight School. Flight School from acclaimed simulation software studio Dovetail Games will put you straight into the cockpit with compelling interactive missions and challenges that will get you flying like a veteran in no time. Choose from 2 highly detailed aircraft which are individually tailored to different in-depth experiences. Meanwhile, your unique pilot profile tracks your achievements and licenses throughout your career," and so on and so forth. Starting it up, I knew immediately that this was based on the old FSX engine and must have been updated to provide 64-bit compatibility. The problem there was that I could not see how something like this would be any good, considering that we already have FSX, and whilst dated it still looks awesome with add-ons and tweaks. Knowing that this was developed with Orbex though, I assumed that at the very least we'd be looking at some really awesome graphics. Upon starting I had to choose a pilot name and home base, which I picked to be Heathrow. Other settings looked fairly standard, though I was disappointed to see that they had dumbed down the vast range of options that FSX once offered. The control setup systems were different and took a little fiddling with to understand, but under the interface it offered the exact same controls that I had been using for the past decade or more. Selecting the plane was quite fancy and smooth, but then selecting an airport I found to be quite cumbersome and tedious, as you had to file some sort of flight plan to get anywhere. Loading times to get into the sim were not too bad either, around the same time as what I would expect from a mildly modded version of FSX. And I know I'm referring back to FSX all the time, but when a sim is built off that, you really do have to keep looking back. And also, since that flight simulator is the benchmark flight simulator, you have to pay close attention to it. Once the sim was loaded in, I have to admit I was disappointed. As there were only 2 aircraft, the Piper Cub and the PA-28, I was expecting a thoroughly detailed flight model with fantastic physics and highly detailed gauges, panels and interactions. What I got instead was something that looked like it was a refined version of what you'd find a decade ago. Now, don't get me wrong, I was not expecting A2A or PMDG levels of simulation accuracy, not for the price. But for something that's called Flight School, there is a need for a certain level of accuracy, and this did not have it. So I jumped out of that to take a look at the mission screen, which again was disappointing. With such limited missions and only 2 aircraft, it makes me wonder really what was the point of the sim. Under the pretty interface, it looked like FSX, it felt like FSX, and the only real differences were improved graphics and cutback features. However, I kept going because I did think about the title. Since it's called Flight School, I would assume that that would be where it really focuses. Clicking on the Flight School area, I was given a choice to try a PPL or an LAPL. For those of you who don't know, a PPL is a private pilot's license and an LAPL is a light aircraft pilot license. Now, I naturally clicked the PPL first, expecting a bunch of introductions to aircraft and how to fly, but my first experience was traffic patterns, which to me made little to no sense at all. After failing that mission, admittedly that was down to me not trimming the aircraft properly, I took a look at the LAPL. This made much more sense and started off a pilot right at the beginning, which was takeoff. I felt much happy about that and did a few of the lessons, getting a feel for how the sim worked. Now, to try and be as fair as I can with this sim, I decided to take a flight in London, first using FSX, which with one of the default aircraft and the scenery add-ons, to see what I could bring about, and then testing it in Flight School. What I noticed is that with all of this is that the new sim runs smoother, has better environmental effects than Trusty Classic, and just, it felt better. The frames felt a lot better, but generally the flying felt exactly the same. To be honest, I felt that maybe the colours were a little bit oversaturated, but that's neither here nor there because that's down to personal preference and that's just me. The important part was to ensure that London, where the flight sims are known to struggle, was running better than I had seen in any other sim. That being said, I have not yet taken a look at Prepared or P3D, so that may be just as good. Going back to the availability of missions, lessons, or the lack thereof, this product costs around £12, which is around $18 USD. At present, Dovetail Games also have Microsoft's Flight Simulator 10 available for Steam, and that's £16 or in USD $23. The price range is pretty close, so I'm going to do a straight comparison of the following: aircraft variation, lessons, missions, visuals, flight models, and sounds. Aircraft. Flight Simulator 10 wins this hands down. Single prop, twin prop, jet aircraft available, and you also have helicopters and stunt aircraft. Flight School only has 2 aircraft, both of them are single prop. Admittedly, yes, one is a tail dragger. Lessons. This is where Flight School was meant to shine, being designed to teach you about flying from scratch. But again, Flight Simulator 10 beats this easily, with more intuitive lessons, more lessons full stop, and an entire learning center with in-depth information about aircraft and each lesson for you to read beforehand. Missions. Again, FSX has the edge with around 80 missions available, ranging from simple takeoff missions to helicopter rescue missions, whilst this had a fair few missions, but only 15. And they were varied, but still, only 15 missions. Visuals. Definite score for the Flight School. The visuals in this are definitely better than FSX with the Orbex partnership. Ambient feels more realistic too, and weather effects are pretty decent. Like I said, I felt it to be a little oversaturated, but that's just me. Plus, even with mods and add-ons, my FSX install still did not look quite as nice as this did in overall feel, so that's definitely a boost. Flight models. Exactly the same as the default FSX. The models are decent but lacking in detail, which is always sad, particularly in a title where there are only 2 aircraft, but overall they provide the same sort of physics in flight and interactivity. Sounds. Again, a dead heat between the two. I'm not going to comment much because both have the same positives and negatives to their sound and sound quality, and they were pretty much exactly the same. So with a total reviews rating of 70 out of 100, who should purchase this title? Well, if you want a simulator where the graphics are more up to date, and you've never really tried flying simulators before, then for the price this is probably worth it. But if you've dabbled in them before, whether you come from an X-Plane or FS10 background, then you might want to consider holding on to what you have, and perhaps modding it, or saving up for the more expensive Prepared 3D, or P3D, as that would probably be your best bet to really enjoy your simulation. This title is certainly not for me as much as I was hoping it would be, but like I said, if you've never tried a flight simulator before, click on the link in the description box below and have a look at this title, and if you purchase it from there, you'll get it at a discounted rate from Games Planet and support me at the same time. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time in Total Reviews.